welcome back to FordeeTV. I'm your host, Fordee. So today, guys, we are in After Effects for Beginners Part 3. We are talking about shapes. Let's talk about shapes, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about shapes. Guys, I'm sorry. I need to have a sense of humor right now. I've cut back on my coffee and I'm struggling. I went from like 6 cups a day and like straight espressos down to 1 and I'm feeling it, huh? Anyways, not your problem. Let's get into it. So we're inside After Effects and we're going to create a new composition. Comp 1 name, that's fine, 1920 1080 for the resolution, 30 frames per second, 10 seconds long, okay. Does that matter? Not really, huh? You can create shapes in a lot of different ways. The first thing we're going to talk about are parametric shapes. Up here in the toolbar, you're going to see that we have a square or rectangle tool available. Then you have rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and star. Really, this is 3 tools. The 2 rectangle tools can be, you use either one, and you can round off the rectangle tool, and you can also square off the rounded. So that's one tool. Ellipse tool is separate, and polygon and star are the same tool also because you can change them after the fact. Let me show you. With selecting the rectangle tool, I'm going to click and I'm going to drag inside my composition. It creates a rectangle based on the fill settings here and the stroke settings here, right? Once I enable this tool right here, they became available. If I wanted to hide, for example, my stroke, I could click on stroke and select hide right here. Now you can do that also here in the layers palette. So just real quick, there's an option for a gradient, right? And also a radial gradient. Now, I suppose that would look a lot better if I clicked on the word fill here and showed you here. So, and these are the settings that you use last. So for me, it was red to transparent. We will get into this in a second. So I'm going to select the solid color, say OK, and let's jump into the contents of the shape layer. If it's not showing for you, click on the arrow next to contents, click on the arrow next to rectangle 1, and now you'll see several options. In rectangular path, if I click on the arrow here, you'll see there's a roundness setting. And as I drag this in, we can make this look like a pill, for example, right? Or we could square it off. If you had the rounded rectangle tool and you set it, you could make it square, right? Or hard-edged, just like this, right? So that's about it. I mean, position size is self-explanatory. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. You're going to see that we have stroke options. If we wanted to hide our stroke, we could click on the visibility icon here. It's the same as going up here to stroke and saying, I want to hide you, baby. So that's fine. It's right now, it's hidden. Now it's shown. When it's shown, we have these options. Of course, we could change the color here. We could change the opacity. So if we drop this down, it's making it more transparent, huh? The stroke width, this is how big that stroke is, right? A bit too much there, huh? Anyways, we're going to make it a little bit large so that some other things are more obvious, right? So if we come down here to miter join, we can change this to round join, and it's going to round those edges, right? If we change it to bevel join, it makes a bevel on those edges, right? I skipped over line cap, and the reason for that is if we change it right now, nothing is going to happen, right? I'll set it back to butt cap, and the way to make those options work or have any functionality is we need to create some dashes. If we click on the plus sign right here, we create dashes, and by increasing this number right here, we're making them bigger, fatter, like we're feeding them cheeseburgers, yo. Also, once you have the dash setting that you like, you can animate it by animating the offset, right? So if we wanted them to twirl around slowly, fastly, in either direction, etc. Now, if we have dashes in, then we can come over here and change it from butt cap to rounded cap to projecting cap, etc. It changes the look of those dashes. I'm going to click on the minus sign here to get rid of this. Also, I'm going to drop this stroke width down a bit, and we can go from bevel join to miter join and leave it there, huh? I'll go ahead and click on the arrow next to stroke, and let's get into fill. Same thing. The visibility icon turns the availability of the stroke, same as if you came up here and said, I don't want a fill. We can turn it back on by clicking here. Next, you have just a color option and opacity. If we want to drop the opacity so it interacts differently with the layer below it, you could do that. Now, if we click on fill up here and we change this to a gradient, for example, and say OK, now we have something called gradient fill in the rectangle 1, which has a few other options, huh? Where the start of the gradient's happening, where the end of it's happening. You can click on this to edit the gradient. On the bottom, you have your colors of which the gradient will gradation to. not a correct word, but that's all right, huh? Right now, it's set from red to black. On the top are your opacity stops, right? So right now it's set from fully opaque to go to transparent. If we click on this right here, we could change the opacity to 100, and now it's going from opaque to opaque, which means it's going from red to black. We can verify that by clicking on this right here and then changing it to green, for example. Now it's going from red to green. We can adjust where this gradient is happening by moving the location of this gradient over, right? So another thing we can do is we can click over here and we can add another color. If we want to set this to orange, for example, right? And of course, by dragging on this changes where that gradient is going to start happening with the transference to the next color. I'm going to cancel this out. We don't need to work with the gradient anyway, but now you have the idea. These are the settings for that. Next thing I should point out is there is a transform property for this rectangle, and there's a transform property for the whole shape layer, right? I'll come up here to fill, I'll click on fill, I'll select solid color, I'll say okay. Just it's easier to see, easier for us to work. So if we come over here to the transform properties for the rectangle, you'll see that we could change the scale of this, we could change its location in our composition, we can skew it, you know, whatever we want to do, huh? All this stuff pretty much self-explanatory. But why are there two different transform properties? So if we select this layer, the shape layer 1, we make sure we have the rectangle tool selected, and we click and we drag and we have another rectangle here. We'll go ahead and let go. And now if we make changes to, for example, the scale, this scale is only affecting one, so we could affect these differently. But if we want to affect everything as a whole, we go to the transform properties of the layer. And now if we adjust the scale, we're adjusting them in relation to what their settings are on their individual transforms. So that's pretty powerful. Let's go ahead and delete the shape layer for now, and let's move on. We're going to click on this, hold our mouse button down, and we're going to select the ellipse tool. Now, when I click and drag, I'm drawing an ellipse, right? If I want this ellipse, right, to be a circle, I need to hold shift. That will constrain its X and Y proportions together, right? If I let go, we have a perfect circle. If I come back over here and I switch to the rectangle tool, I could click and drag and hold shift and I'll create a perfect square. I'm going to press Apple Z to undo. We'll switch back over to the ellipse tool. Perfect. Now, I'm going to delete this ellipse right here. When I do, you'll notice the shape layer stays. If I click with the ellipse tool selected and a shape layer created, it will draw that shape inside the layer. If I click and drag, you notice that it's starting this circle from the point in which I clicked. If I hold Command after I clicked, then it's creating the center point of that circle to be in the center, right? So again, if I hold Shift, now it could be a perfect circle, and depending on what you're doing when you're creating these shapes, maybe you want the center point to start there, or maybe you want to click and drag, and then the center point is starting in the top left corner, right? So Shift constrains proportion. Command makes sure it starts the center point in where you click, and then spacebar, once you click, allows you to reposition. All of these things you need to hold down until you want to commit the action. Then you let go of your mouse button and you let go of whatever the modifier was, right? Another thing important to note, if I hold Shift and I click and drag, is fine, right? I can do that before I click. But if I press Command and I click, what happens? It does not let me create a shape. You need to click and start dragging and then press Command if you want to do that modifier, right? I'm going to select this shape layer, delete them all, and just create one. Press spacebar to reposition it, hold down Shift, make sure it's a circle. Not like it has to be, but I'll click on the arrow here. I'll show the ellipse path properties, and it's simple. Size, position, huh? Same thing, stroke, fill, inside transform properties. We even have skew for the ellipse. It's basically very, very similar to the rectangle tool. I'll select the shape layer 1 here, press delete. I'll click, hold my mouse button down, and I'll select the Polygon tool. When I do that, I can click and I can drag, press spacebar to reposition, and I have a polygon here. If I let go of the spacebar, I can press the up and down arrow keys on my keyboard to change the amount of vertices inside this polygon. Now, it could have 4, and that could be a square. It could have 3, it can be a triangle. It can't have less than 3. Now, once we go past a certain number, you'll notice this gets very round, like a circle, and we're increasing our vertices, and we're not going to see a difference. So I'm going to press down. In fact, let's just leave it right here. Let go of our mouse button. We've committed it. We can come over here into the Polystar, click on the arrow here, click on the arrow for Polystar Path, and you'll notice that we have points right here. If I click and I drag, we can change how many vertices are showing after the effect here, right? You'll also notice there's a type. Here it says polygon. If we click on this, we could change it to a star after the fact. That's why I said the Polystar tool or the Polygon tool and the star tool are really just the Polystar tool. It's both of them. We'll switch back over to Polygon, and you'll notice that there are a few more options. We're going to get to the star in a second. We have an outer radius. What's very important to note, if we click and we drag this, this is not a scale. Well, not exactly. It's a scale that ignores the stroke. You'll notice the stroke does not change size as I change my outer radius. If I come over here to the transform properties of this layer and I scale this up, look at that stroke. The stroke gets larger, right? So I'll press Command Z to undo, and we'll see the outer roundness is just around those corners, huh? Of course, we can over-exaggerate and create some weird-looking flower, and keep in mind there are negative values also. And you can animate this stuff. You can do whatever you want, baby. We're not going to go over stroke and fill because we already did that, and as well as the transform properties for this layer. I'll select the Polystar 1, press delete on my keyboard. I will come up here and select the star tool. When I click and I drag, again, we can press up and down to increase points. It's vertices for polygons and points for stars, right? And so this is a standard looking star. I'll press spacebar. I'm going to drag it over, and I'm going to let go. You have one other or two other options in the star tool or Polystar, right? When you're creating a star, you have inner roundness and inner radius. Remember, in the other in the Polygon tool, we had the outer roundness, and what we're doing here for the outer roundness is we're rounding the points in the outer portion of the star. But you notice we have inner points, so outer points, inner points, right? If we want to round out the inner points, we can click here. And we can create all different kinds of cool looking things, right? And of course, there's negative values and so forth. All of this can be animated, etc. It can fold in on itself and so forth, right? Again, here there's the outer radius to make those outer points larger. You can change the inner radius to make them larger or smaller, right? So notice that for radius, there are no negative values, only for the roundness factor, right? So, all right. Now we've created all of the different types of parametric shapes, right? One thing we'll note, I'm going to go ahead and select Shape Layer 1, press Delete. No matter which one we have selected, I'll select the rectangle tool. If we have nothing selected in our layers palette, and I double click on this right here, it makes a shape the size of our composition, right? I'll press Delete to remove that. If I select the Ellipse tool and I double click on it, boom, it creates it the size of the composition. Now, when we do it with the star, the polygon, it's almost the size of the composition. I don't know why it doesn't go here to the bottom, huh? And the same thing with the star. We'll go ahead and select the star. We'll double click. Boom. Now, keep in mind that we have a shape layer here because of the first time we created one, it created a shape layer, and when we deleted, we just deleted the shape, not the layer. But let's go ahead and show something. I'm going to delete this layer. I'm going to right click, say new, and then go to solid. Solid size, let's make it yellow. It's the comp size. You can click that here to make sure it is. Say OK. Now, this is a full yellow solid in our view. If we have this selected and we come up to our parametric shapes and we click and we draw, what happened is we did not draw a shape. We drew a mask on the layer that was selected. This will work for every type of layer except shape layers. Obviously, shape layers draw shapes, or if we click here to make sure nothing's selected and we draw, we are creating a shape layer, right? So when nothing's selected, it creates a shape layer, or when we double click up here, But if any other type of layer we have is selected, it will create a mask for it. We will get into masks later, so don't worry so much. I'm going to delete these 2 layers from my composition right here, and let's move on over to the pen tool. So right next to our parametric shapes, we have a pen tool. Another way to create shapes, and basically shapes are paths that have the option of having a fill and a stroke. So if I click in here and I click once and drag, click twice, drag, click 3 times and drag, you'll notice that we have a stroke, which is white here, set to 17 pixels, and a fill. We can click on the word fill here and hide the view of the fill, right? If I say OK and I twirl down the properties for the contents, shape 1, there's some things that you might want to consider. In the stroke options here, this butt cap, for example, let's go ahead and increase our view to 200%. I'm going to press spacebar to drag my composition over a hair. And if we change this from butt cap to round cap, you'll notice that the end of the point changes, right? And if I change this to projecting cap, it pushes the projecting cap and the butt cap are the same, except projecting pushes it past the point, right? If I switch to butt cap, you're going to see that it ends at the point, right? Projecting just pushes it further out. So obviously we can create some dashes in this just the same. You can animate them. You can increase the thickness of the dashes. You could use this to create some type of arrow that's pointing at something, etc., right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete the shape layer, and I'm going to show you when you have the pen tool selected, you can click on Roto Bezier. What will happen when we do that, if we click twice, it creates a straight line for the shape, right? Which is not curved. However, if we click a third point, it is automatically going to curve all the points after the second point is drawn. So from the third point on, all of them then become some type of curved shape, right? It's going to take a second, it's going to process, and now we have this shape. I don't know why you would ever want to use Roto Bezier, to be honest, because you can draw this yourself, right? If I uncheck this and I select right here, selecting the pen tool, if I click and I drag, for example, I have much more control, right? And I come over here, whatever, maybe here I press spacebar to reposition this up, and I let go and I say, wait, I don't like that, right? So if I come over here and I press Option, I can change how this is going to look, and not just how it's going to look. When I press Option, what I'm doing is breaking the relation between these 2 handles. So if I come over here and I drag this up, you just have way more control in using the pen tool without this Roto Bezier. But if you don't understand how to use the pen tool, then maybe it could come into play, etc. If you guys want me to make a tutorial on using the pen tool, I can do that. Otherwise, I'm sure some exist and so forth, right? So let me glance at my notes real quick. I have 2 pages of notes here. What I want to go over. Let me see what else we want to cover before we move on. All right, so while I was looking through my notes, I accidentally deleted the lines or the shapes that we had created, so I'm just going to create one. Once again, I'm going to select the pen tool right here. I'm going to click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. So now we have this line right here, right? If we want to make changes to these points, before we've committed this shape, we can. We can come over here, click on a point, move it, etc. We have to be real careful, because if we click anywhere else, it could create an extension of that shape. It didn't right now, and that's good. But if we come over here to the selection tool, now if we want to move one of these points easily, there we go, right? No problem. We can press Shift on our keyboard to select multiple points. Now these 2 points are selected. You can see that this is a solid square, this is a solid square, and this is an empty square. That means these 2 are selected. If I click and drag, I'm moving both those points at the same time. If I want to change the Bezier handles, I can just by clicking and dragging, right? If I want to break the relation between these 2 Bezier handles, I need to make sure that I'm on the pen tool, and then I press Option or Alt and I click, and it's going to break the relationship between them, right? Which makes it so that I can adjust one while the other one stays where it wants to be, right? So that's pretty cool. If we are in the selection tool, for example, and we want to move this, we don't have to come in here and press Shift and get all of them. All we have to do is double click on one of the points. It will create a bounding box around the shape, and now I can click and drag and move it around. If I click, if I then just want to select one of these shapes, notice that or one of the points, I cannot. I need to press Enter on my keyboard. Now, notice all 3 of the points are selected. If I press Shift on my keyboard on one of the points, it unselects that point. And now if I just wanted to select this, even though these 2 other ones are selected, all I have to do is click on this, and now just this one is selected, right? So that's how you select points, you move them around, etc. You make changes to the path and so forth. Now, let's go ahead and delete this, and I will show you with a parametric shape. If we create a shape right here, and let's add a fill just because we're cool like that. And now if I come over here to the selection tool and I click, whenever I drag on one of these points, what I'm doing is I'm not adjusting one of these points by itself. It doesn't matter if you hold shift, right? What I'm doing is adjusting the transform of this shape because this is a native shape, right? Or a parametric shape. That's something to keep note of, right? So besides creating shapes with the pen, besides creating shapes with the parametric shapes, we can create shapes with text, right? So let's go ahead and click on the shape layer right here. We're going to right click, we're going to say new, we're going to say text, right? We're going to type the numbers 40 for 40, baby. I'm going to click on my selection tool to commit the type. I'm going to drag it somewhere in the middle, and then I'm going to come over to the layer. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go down to create. I know it's off the screen, but you're looking for create, and then create shapes from text. When I do that, you'll notice that it hides my text layer, and now I have a shape layer called Fordee Outlines. If I click on the drop down here, and then you'll see inside of contents, I have the 4 and 0, right? Two separate shapes. However, the 4 has two shapes within that shape. You'll notice if I click on the visibility here, there is a shape that defines this inner portion, just like on the 0, right? If I come over here, and I open up the 0, it's the same thing. We have something there, right? So you can create shapes from text, and yeah, what does that mean? Like we can make changes to this. For example, we can add path operators. I'm going to get into that in a second. I want to show you first how to bring in text from Illustrator and Photoshop. So let's come back to it. But simply, that's all you have to do, right? Of course, you have the option to change your strokes, change the fill, etc., the transform, and so forth. I'm going to delete Fordee outlines. I'm going to delete the text layer, and let's talk about Illustrator, right? If I double-click on over here to load a file, you'll see I have this sweettreats.ai. If I press spacebar, you'll see it's all these different treats. And what I did in Illustrator is I moved this lollipop to its own layer because otherwise they're all on the same layer except for the lollipop. I'll say open, and why that matters. So if I say merge layer, this is going to bring in that whole thing. I don't want to do that. I want to select choose layer. And remember I said I moved the lollipop to its own layer inside Illustrator. And so I can select lollipop. I can say the footage dimensions of the layer size, right? Document size would be the document size inside Adobe Illustrator, and we'd rather have layer size. I'm going to click on OK. It drops that lollipop over here as an AI file. When I drag this into my composition, number one, you're like, wait, this is not a shape. It's not, right? I can scale this up by pressing the S tool, and as I bring this up, one thing that you're going to notice is you're going to say, hey, this is a vector-based file, but it's pixelated. Well, one of the reasons is you have to click on this for continuous rasterization of the vector file, right? This little gearish looking things right here. You see for vector layouts, it continually rasterizes it. When we click on that, boom, perfect, right? It doesn't lose any quality no matter what size this is because it's a vector file, but we need to click on that option right here, right? So again, this is just an Illustrator file. It is not a shape. If we want to make it a shape, we have to right click on it, go down to create. Again, I know it's off the screen, and then say create shape layers from vector layer. When we do that, you'll notice it hides that Adobe Illustrator file. I'm going to delete it just to show you. And now we have this shape. If we click on the drop down here and inside the contents, you'll notice that we have three groups. Group 1 is the stick, and we can rename it. We can click on group 1, press enter, and call it stick, right? We can come over to group 2, which is the swirl, right? Press enter, type swirl, and then we can hide this, and this is the circle, right? Or the sucker, I don't know what you want to call it. Huh? But the reason that now all of this is separated, if we open up the swirl, for example, we can change the fill. Right now it's that pink. If we click on it, we can make it another color, right? If I click here and maybe make this a darker green. We can, of course, come over to the circle, and we can change this fill right here, and we can have it interact. Actually, because it's below the swirl, maybe you want to set the blend mode of the swirl to be I don't know, soft light or something. Notice you see how it changes. It interacts with the colors below because this is a blend mode set, right? Of course, we can do different things. Maybe we want the circle to be larger, so we come over here to the path, not the path, we come over to the transform of the circle, and we can increase this. All of this stuff could be animated, right? So we could say from here to grow to here, or whatever we want to do. Super powerful, being able to import a vector file and creating shapes out of it. One of the things you might want to consider for some really complicated vector-based files is it may end up creating lots and lots of groups, yo. So another thing, remember that this now as a layer has its own transforms. So of course we can scale this any which way we want. Remember that because we turn this continually rasterize on the vector file, it's automatically on in the shape, right? So if it wasn't, you'd have to go ahead and turn that on here, right? We can change the opacity, we can change the rotation, and this is on a global scale, the whole layer, right? So sweet, there we go. That's how you bring in a vector file, convert it into shapes. I'm gonna go ahead and close this out, delete it. I could delete it here from my project panel, and awesome. Next, how do we create paths inside Photoshop and then make shapes out of those paths in After Effects? So I'm going to click on Photoshop. I have Photoshop open right here, right? And I have a file here called Ghost AI, right? This was actually an Illustrator file, but what I want to do is I want to isolate one of these ghosts. How about this one? This one looks happy, right? Actually, most of them look happy. I'm going to click over here on my lasso tool, Polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to select around this ghost and to isolate them from the rest of the ghosts. Now when I press Command C on my keyboard, I've copied this. I'm going to press Command N, and we're going to use the clipboard value. When I press Enter and then press Control V, you'll notice that we have this ghost here. If I come over to the layer, if I press Command on my keyboard and click on the icon of this layer, notice it selects that layer. That's not what we want it to do, because you'll notice that the white is still existent here. If I press W on my keyboard, I could come and I click right here and press Delete, and you'll notice that now when we hide this background, and I press Command D to deselect everything, we just have this ghost here, which is perfect, right? Because if we press Command and click on the layer icon, we have now select the outline of this ghost. We can come over to Paths right here and then click on this button right here. What this button does is it creates a work path from our selection. When we click on this, boom, now we have a path here. If we press Command C on our keyboard and we switch back on over to After Effects, we can't press Command V yet because we have to create a shape, right? So if I take the pen tool, for example, and I click one point and then press Command V, all right, so I just I just figured out why it wasn't pasting the path, right? So if we go back over to Photoshop, we have this path selected here, right? But we don't have the pen tool selected. It's important that you have the pen tool selected. When you press Command C, it's gonna copy this path because the pen tool is selected. So now if we come back on over to After Effects and we select the pen tool, we make one point and press Command V, it pastes that working path as a shape inside After Effects. You might be saying, hey, where's the mouth, where's the eyes, etc. Well, we could bring those in too, but keep in mind all of this is separate. All we did is have this outline here. So if we select the magic wand, for example, make sure we're on the ghost layer, click on the mouth. Now we have that mouth as a selection. We can come over to Paths, click on Create Path from Selection, and now this mouth is selected. Remember, click on the pen tool, press Command C, come back on over to After Effects. With the pen tool selected, we will draw one point or create one point and press Command V, and now we've got the mouth. I'll go ahead and drag it up by clicking on the selection tool, dragging this up, right? Of course, we can make changes. We could go ahead and we can turn off the stroke by coming here, turning this off. Next, we could change the fill from green, change it to black. Now it looks more like it should, right? Obviously, we could recreate this total character inside After Effects and animate all of it. So at this point, you've seen parametric shapes, you've seen paths that you create with the pen tool or shapes you create with the pen tool using the Roto Bezier or not, and you've seen how to create shapes out of text or a text layer. You've seen how to bring in Adobe Illustrator vector files and create shapes from those vector layers. You've also seen how to copy working paths in Photoshop, bring them in to create shapes inside After Effects. The only thing left to discuss today is path operations, baby. So let's go ahead and delete this ghost, the shape layer, right? It was looking beautiful, but let's do something a little simpler. I'm gonna go ahead and click on the rectangle here, and I'm gonna click and draw, and what did we do? We created a shape here. The problem is it's black, Remember, this is transparent, but we can't see it, so let's change the color from black, again, to maybe some dark green or something. I'll say OK. We could turn the stroke back on if we like by clicking on this, saying OK, and now we're here. Notice next to contents, no matter what shape it is, you have this little thing that says add here. If we click on the arrow here, we have several options we can select from. These first 4 options, rectangle, ellipse, polystar, path, etc., this allows me to add another shape to this shape, right? So let me show you. For example, if I click on Polystar, boom, it added this star in the middle. I'm not going to make any changes, huh? I just want to show you that right now, it's not doing anything special. But you have this other option under add called merge paths. When I add merge paths, I could tell it to interact a certain way. I could click this and then say subtract, for example. And now it's subtracting the star from the rectangle, keeping that fill. But if I wanted to hide the fill, right? Or not the fill. If I wanted to hide the stroke, I'd come over here to the Polystar Path and I could find my stroke right there. Actually, it's on a global scale, right? Because this is not a star stroke. This is the stroke from the rectangle, and we remove the star from it, so now it has inside points, and that's what's happening. I'm sorry. I need more coffee, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Polystar star. I'm going to click delete. I'm going to click on delete on merge pass, and let's continue, huh? If you want to add a fill, stroke, gradient fill, gradient stroke after the fact because you deleted it or you need to override, you can select it here, huh? We talked about merge pass, offset pass, right? If we select offset pass, what this is going to do is this is going to offset the path. You see that our path is this blue bounding box right here. Right now, if we increase this number, it's making our shape larger than our path. That's what offset pass does, right? If we bring it down to a negative value, we're making the shape smaller than our path. That's all this does, right? As far as miter join, this is how the edges are, the miter limit, etc. We're going to delete this and we are going to move on. Next, we have pucker and bloat. It does exactly what it sounds like, right? It either makes it fatter or it makes it or pulls it in, right? Whether this value is positive, which right now, if we bring this up, it's set to pucker, what is like pulling in. So we can make a 4-leaf clover like this. If we make it in the other direction, or maybe this is pucker, negative is pucker, and positive is bloat, right? So we can pull it in different ways. And of course, all of this can be animated wherever there's a stopwatch. Click it, baby, and make it happen. I'm going to select pucker and bloat, press delete, and come over here to add. Next, we have a repeater, right? And now this stuff, by the way, is appearing off screen. If you're following along with me, you will see it, obviously, right? I'm going to skip repeater for now. And in fact, the next one we're going to do is rounded corners, but why don't we select a different option? Let's select the star, bring the star in, press spacebar, drag it over, and then delete the rectangle, right? So now I have this star here. If I click on add and go down to rounded corners, now I have a rounded corners option. And when I click and I bring this up, I'm rounding the corners. Notice that it rounds the interior points and the exterior points of the star. Now, whatever shape you're working in, it's just going to round the points, right? But for a star, it does both of them. That's something to keep in mind. I'm going to delete rounded corners by pressing delete on my keyboard, coming over to add, and then coming to trim pass, right? When I click on trim pass, you're going to notice that we have a start, right? And we have an end. Now, where these things are trimming, this is the start and end, you can animate this. This is an offset. To see the offset, we're going to go ahead and start this, like bring this in like this, right? Just a little bit. Now, if we change the offset, we're changing where that happens. Now, notice we can just animate this. That looks a little bit funky. Maybe even turning this up maybe a bit more, something to this effect. And maybe this is not the exact shape that you would do this with, or maybe you would, I don't know. But this is what trim pass does, baby. So I'm going to go ahead and click on trim pass. I'm going to press delete. I'll come over to add. And underneath trim pass, we have twist. And twist is like twist and shout, right? And twist is going to twist this into like a twist. I don't know, right? It's just basically going to twist your object a bit. The center point being in the center of this object. You can adjust that center point over here, but it's not going to show you a visual cue on screen, right? So this is something to know, that you can adjust the center point, but you can't see where it is. I'm going to select twist, press delete on my keyboard, and we're going to come down to wiggle path. Right? Now, wiggle pass is going to animate without you setting keyframes. If I press spacebar, notice that the path is wiggling, right? Wiggle is basically an operation that it generates a waveform of noise to be applied to certain values, right? So right now, this is just set to the path. Remember, that path is the outline of the shape, right? So we can change the size of that wiggle. Is getting crazy, right? And the detail of the wiggle, so you want it more spikes in this particular situation or less. If we set it just to 1, is not a whole lot of wiggle going on, right? Oh, I got issues, huh? So anyways, you can create some really interesting animations. This correlation is kind of like so wiggles per second, let's start there. Wiggles per second right now is set to 2. If we jump this up to like 20, for example, it's going to go crazy. Right? Like it's having a seizure or something, right? So let's drop this down to something a little bit less. Set it to 5. I'll press spacebar. So what's happening is that this is wiggling 5 times a second, and this correlation is in the middle. If we drop this down less, there is going to be more variations of the noise waveform being applied to this. So if you watch now, this will be more evident when we go from wiggle pass to wiggle transform. So we will come back to correlation then. The temporal phase, the spatial phase, what they are, remember I said this is a waveform. For audio people, think of it as that it's generating a sine wave like a synthesizer would, right? So if you set it to a sine wave or a square wave or whatever, obviously you don't have the options to set what waveform this is creating, but temporal phase, by adjusting this, is just going to help you with some randomness, but it's going to move that waveform in X direction, right? Spatial phase is moving that waveform in Y direction. And again, if it doesn't make sense to you, it's okay. It's unnecessary. Huh? All this is doing is going to create more randomness for this wiggle, right? Random seed being set to 0. If you create, random is not actually random, right? It's a mathematical formula in a computer that says, hey, randomize this and that. If your random seed is set to the same number on multiple items, they will do exactly the same thing. But that's the point of random seed, is you could change the seed, and that adds this number to the formula to give you a different starting point. And that's how you make something more random, right? So again, we'll set it to 0, and this is what wiggle pass does. It basically changes the path of the outline of the shape, and it makes it do some dancing, right? I'm going to go ahead and press select this wiggle pass, press delete. We're back to where we were. We'll click on the add. We'll come to wiggle transform. Now, wiggle transform, if we press spacebar, nothing happens, yo. And that's because you have to make some changes. And wiggle transform is changing the transform. You'll notice that when we open this up, there is a transform just for wiggle transform. There are also the same options or similar options that we saw in wiggle path. First, if we increase, for example, our size in X, right? Now if we press spacebar, you'll notice, this is not high enough, right? But let's set this back to 0. Let's put the scale to 50 or, 50. Boom. And this is going both in X and Y, so it's uniform scale. Now if we press spacebar, this is now the transform of the scale is being animated at 2 wiggles a second. The correlation, let's bump this up a bit bigger. Let's set this up to 100, for example. Now when we press spacebar, right? Let's set the correlation to 100. And the reason I want to set it to 100 is when I press the spacebar, this wiggle is very linear, right? The transform of the 100% increase in scale or decrease in scale is very linear. It goes from one to the other. If we drop this to 1%, what you're going to see is a lot more variation. It's like adding a random number just to the wiggles, right? So sometimes it's going to wiggle a lot less. Now, it's doing that by default, but watch the difference. And again, maybe scale is not the best one to show on this. Let's set this to, set it to 100 in X. And now if we press spacebar, no, let's set it to 1000. So now, this is set at 1. We'll press spacebar. Notice it picks, sometimes it just goes a little bit, sometimes it goes 4, etc. If we bump this up to 100% correlation, watch now. It's more taking those larger jumps of the value that's set here, right? That's all correlation is. All of these options right here under the wiggle are to give you variations of your wiggle. Wiggle it just a... Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and select Wiggle Transform, press Delete on my keyboard, and come over here to Add, right? We have two other options. So we've got Zigzag. That's the last one in the list, but we skipped Repeater, so we're going to come back to it. So in the size, as we increase the size, this increases the size of those zigzags. In fact, at this point now, it's looking like a snowflake, right? It is winter at the moment. So again, this doesn't have a negative value, but you can really overdo this. You can create some funky looking shapes. You can animate this. If we set this to 10, for example, and we change the ridges segment, we can increase or decrease the amount of ridges that are going on, right? And again, of course, all of this could be animated. You could change where those points are coming to be corner points, or you could set them to be smooth points so it rounds them out, etc., right? So one more thing. I'm going to delete this zigzag. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to Repeater. Probably the most powerful of all the path operators inside the shapes. In the Repeater, I'll click on the arrow right here. And you'll see right here it says copies 3. It's not 3 copies on top of the original. It's saying 3 total copies. Of course, we can increase this, right? So let's go ahead. And of course, we can animate it set to 0. If we take the selection tool and we move this puppy over, we can then say, for example, if we drag our playhead to the beginning. And again, guys, I don't explain every time that you can animate this. I'll set this to 0. I'll click on the stopwatch. I'll go ahead in time. This is something that at this point I hope that you have an understanding of, is that you can set a keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch, move ahead to a different point in time, and it creates another keyframe and it animates between the two. So if I press spacebar, we've got these stars coming on. Obviously, we can do different transforms to that repeater. So for example, maybe we want them to come on or shoot down as they repeat on, right? Maybe we also want their rotation to be something like this. Maybe we want to drop their scale over time, something like this. Now, if we watch this, whoa. Anyway, guys, you can play with the settings more. I hope you found this tutorial useful, beneficial. You learned a little something. Shapes are extremely powerful. When I finish this beginner series, if you guys are interested, I could go into a more in-depth look at shapes and some really powerful examples on how you could use them in your projects to make some exciting and impressive animations. Well, if you guys found this tutorial useful and helpful, please share it with your friends, man. It means the world to me. Also, like, comment, subscribe, save, etc. Until next time, guys, I'm out.